I'm Denton Davidson for Gold Derby, here with Edward Berger, director of All Quiet on the Western Front, Germany's official submission for Best International Feature at the 95th Academy Awards. Edward, first of all, can you talk about what it means for you to represent Germany this year and what you hope to say about German cinema through this film?
God, that's a daunting task and a question. So, I don't know. I don't aspire to speak for Germany. So it just happens to be chosen by the country, and that's, of course, it's always a wonderful thing because more people get to see it. It travels more around the world. There's bigger interest and so forth. So that's wonderful. But so the main thing for me to make this movie was really to tell this German story. It's essentially a very German novel. It's the most successful German book, I think, written and published. It's had the most copies sold, and I've read it like when I was really young, and then again in my 20s, and it always stayed with me. And when the idea came to me put to me by my producer and good friend Malte Grunert, I thought, wow, what a great, why didn't I think of this? It's been sitting there for 90 years, and it's a real opportunity to tell that side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, the classic American version was told in 1930, and that's held in such high regard. Did that concern you to have comparisons to that at all? Or were you just like, no, this is a German story. It's time to be told from a German perspective. And you have so much more technology and a different way that you can tell this story today than they could at that time.
Well, that film is really good. So, and I ignored it, to be honest, and ascribed that to idiocy, maybe, and ignorance. Yeah, and we just went for it. And then while I was making it, or while I was rewriting it and storyboarding it, I sometimes thought, like, why the hell did I do this? What big shoes to fill. But then you essentially just have to go for it. And for me, the biggest motivation was that usually those type of stories are, being told in America or England. And for a long time, I thought it was only, financing was the main reason, because you have American stars and English stars and the language, and there's a bigger reach, and you need quite a bit of money to make a movie like this. So and then I realized eventually it's not only the financing, it's also the stories you are able to tell. The American, let's stick to the Americans. They're since I'm speaking to one. So you were roped into the war, twice and against the will, and liberated Europe from fascism and so forth. England the same. And there's a totally different legacy that stays with you and the kids, the generations to follow, and the filmmakers to follow. There's a story that you can tell of, I guess, heroism, and there's a sense of pride in your country and honor about what happened. And there's nothing like that in Germany. There's only shame, and guilt, and horror, and sense of responsibility towards history, and in the generations to follow also. And I thought that just gives a very different perspective and a very different feeling towards the movie, because all the decisions that we take as filmmakers, they're informed by how we grow up and what we feel and how we see it. And so essentially, hopefully, in the end, a very different film comes out of it. And I thought that might be interesting to share with other countries.
Yeah, and it's a horror story in some ways, or at least a cautionary tale of what happens when you're a young kid and you're just pushed into the trenches and sort of expected to become, a killer. But the tools were different, the weapons were different, the uniforms, everything. So what sort of intense research had to go into this before you could get it on the screen the way that you wanted to?
Well, mostly reading for me. And then I had a wonderful team of, the costume designer, the production designer, every department pulled together their research. And for example, really simple, the uniforms. We made the uniforms from old fabric, hundreds of uniforms. And they are felt. It's kind of a felt material. And you have these, 300 soldiers, extras running across mud and through the rain and through the snow, and their clothes very quickly, get drenched in water, and they don't weigh, I don't know, 30 pounds. Like without water, they suddenly weigh 60 or 70 pounds. And so it's really, you realize very quickly that material is really not suited for people who have to fight in the mud and in the cold, because also the water doesn't go out of it anymore, and it freezes, in the snow and in the cold, it just freezes, and suddenly you have this clammy, very heavy piece of clothing, and you have to lug it around. So I really wasn't envying the actors who ran around with 70 pounds or 80 pounds worth of, weighing clothes through the mud in the cold. And so that's one piece of equipment, for example, that you suddenly realize that what people were wearing at the time.
And this is Felix Kammerer's screen debut, and he gives just a knockout performance. His eyes are so expressive. Can you talk about what it was like for Felix to lead this film?
Well, I found him so he's a first-time actor in front of the camera. He's in a very big theater in Vienna. He's part of the ensemble, and we found him there because the producer's wife works in that theater, and she showed me his picture, and I thought, oh, this kid looks great. He has an old-fashioned, very transparent face, very unusual face, and we wanted someone who has never been seen on camera before, because the role is so iconic, the book is so iconic. So we don't want as much as Felix or Paul Bäumer, the character, goes into the war with innocence, we wanted the actor sort of to go into this movie with innocence, and the audience to embrace him with innocence, not to associate him with any other roles. And, oh, I've seen this kid in that movie before. He sort of needed to be really fresh. And so we were really lucky to find him. It took about 4 castings. And the first casting, I thought, he's great, but, like, how does he feel in a uniform and boots, and how does it change his gait, the way he walks? And so we called him back and put another uniform on him and the boots, and suddenly he felt much more earthy and grounded. And he really grew into this role throughout the 4 or 5 castings that we called him back for. And by the time we made up our mind, we knew there's just no way we can be wrong. This is the kid. And for him, I assume it was quite a weight to carry. I think he told me the other day he was at a picnic when we called him. And he was like, yeah, I got, like, we hung up, and he was at a picnic with his friends. We were like, yeah, I got the role. And suddenly he was like, oh, shit, now I'm going to have to do it, because it's such a responsibility. And he had a lot of training, and he got physically fit and did a lot of running with weighty vests and did a lot of research himself. And I think, for example, there's a scene where he's 10 minutes in the movie. So, 3-4 days of shooting, locked into a crater with a dying Frenchman. And I think scenes like that kind of, he carried it with him for quite a while after the movie. I think it took us all a couple of months to just get rid of all the mud and the blood and all the stuff that comes with it.
What was the biggest technical challenge of the film? Because it's a technical achievement. The cinematography is beautiful. There's obviously a lot of special effects and sound that goes into a war movie. So what's your perspective of all the all-stars that you had working with you behind the camera?
Well, you really needed a top-notch crew, which I was lucky enough to have. And it was a massive battlefield. I don't know, 10 football fields, or I don't know how big it was. It was really big. So, and obviously the actors need to run across it. And I really wanted these very long runs, unedited runs, just running with the characters. And then we dug the trenches in January and built the battlefield, and it was all sort of molded with trucks and so forth, and excavators, and put the barbed wire there and all that stuff. And then we realized, or we thought about it before, but it was, once it was like, if it rains 3 days in a row, it becomes a mud bath, and you can't run anymore. You can't, I once had to rescue the cinematographer. I was in the car, we had done a test, it was getting dark, and he didn't show up. And I got out of the car, and it was an airfield outside of Prague, like an hour outside of Prague. It was freezing and it was dark. And so I was calling, and suddenly he was like, help, help. I hear his voice. Yeah. And then we go into the battlefield, and he was sunk into the mud up to his hips. And he couldn't get out because it was so muddy. And so we got a crane and to pull him out of this mud bath. And so to film in that, we basically had to figure out what piece of equipment to not be shaky all the time, but to be fairly steady and to really be able to look the characters in the eyes, and to we basically built roads inside this battlefield where we knew we could travel on and where the actors could travel on. And so that just took a lot of research and time to figure out, and then the piece of camera equipment that was best to handle that kind of rugged environment.
Well, Edward, it's a great achievement. Such an incredible film. It's been a pleasure speaking with you about All Quiet on the Western Front, and best of luck to you throughout everything else for the rest of this award season and everything else.
Thank you so much.